The fluorescent lights of Chicago General Hospital flickered overhead, casting a sterile glow across the bustling cardiac wing. Nia Carter, a 29-year-old Black American nurse, stood at the nurse's station, her dark brown eyes scanning a patient's chart as she clocked out at 11:47 p.m. Her deep brown skin glistened faintly with sweat, resulting from a grueling 14-hour shift that had begun before dawn. Her tightly coiled hair, pulled back into a practical bun, framed a face etched with exhaustion. The antiseptic scent of the hospital clung to her navy blue scrubs, a second skin she could never fully shed. At 29, Nia felt the weight of years beyond her age. Her shoulders slumped under the responsibilities that seemed to multiply daily. Chicago's skyline glittered through the hospital's glass doors, a mocking reminder of a world Nia could only glimpse from the sidelines. The towering skyscrapers, illuminated against the November night, belonged to people who didn't know the sting of choosing between groceries and electricity, who didn't spend their nights holding the hands of dying strangers while their own lives unraveled. Nia's life was a delicate balancing act. Her mother, Evelyn Carter, a 54-year-old Black American woman, was losing her battle with stage 4 lung cancer. Her once vibrant spirit, now confined to a frail body in a rented apartment. Her younger sister, Zoe Carter, a 17-year-old Black American teenager, was navigating her senior year of high school, her dreams of college teetering on the edge of their precarious finances. The mounting medical bills, overdue rent, and Zoe's SAT prep books formed a relentless equation in Nia's mind, one she solved with every overtime shift she could beg for. As Nia stepped onto the hospital's polished floor, her worn sneakers squeaked faintly, a sound swallowed by the hum of monitors and distant voices. Her reflection in the glass doors revealed a woman whose spark had dimmed, her eyes shadowed by dark circles, her complete lips pressed into a tired line. She adjusted her thin jacket against the biting November wind and headed toward the L platform, the underground train rumble echoing her restless thoughts. The city's pulse felt distant, its promises of opportunity reserved for those who didn't carry the world on their shoulders. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and Nia's heart sank as she read the text from Zoe. "Mom's asking for you. Rough night." At 17, Zoe's smooth brown skin and bright eyes still held the fire of youth, but her texts carried a weight that no teenager should bear. Evelyn's cancer had stripped away her strength, leaving her skin translucent and her eyes heavy with pain. Nia pictured her mother in their cramped South Side apartment, her once commanding presence reduced to a whisper of the woman who'd raised 2 daughters alone after their father's death. The thought tightened Nia's chest. A familiar ache mingled with guilt for the hours she spent saving others while her family slipped through her fingers. The L platform was nearly deserted, its dim lights casting long shadows across the wet concrete. Night shift workers, insomniacs, and the city's lost souls huddled in the corners, their faces blurred in Nia's peripheral vision. She preferred it this way, anonymous, invisible, just another figure in Chicago's endless night. Her mind churned with calculations, rent due in 5 days, Evelyn's pain medication running low, Zoe's college application fees looming. She needed to stop at the 24-hour pharmacy, maybe grab the herbal tea Zoe swore helped with their mother's nausea. The numbers spun in her head, a relentless ledger of survival. Nia's thoughts drifted to Zoe, whose sharp wit and passion for environmental science lit up their small apartment, even on the darkest days. At 17, Zoe was brilliant but angry, her grief for their mother spilling into arguments that left Nia reeling. Just last week, Zoe had slammed her bedroom door, shouting, "You're never here, Nia. I'm losing her, and you're not even trying." The words had cut deeper than Nia cared to admit, but she'd swallowed her hurt, promising to be there for Zoe's college fair. She wanted to be the sister Zoe needed, the daughter Evelyn deserved, but the hospital's demands left little room for anything else. Evelyn's strength had always been Nia's anchor. At 54, even cancer couldn't dull the wisdom in her dark eyes or the warmth in her voice when she spoke of hope. Last night, as Nia adjusted her mother's oxygen mask, Evelyn had gripped her hand, her brown skin cool against Nia's. "You're doing enough, baby," she'd whispered. "You always have." But Nia didn't believe her. Enough would mean a cure, a paid-off bill, a future where Zoe could chase her dreams without fear. Enough felt like a luxury Nia couldn't afford. The train's headlight pierced the tunnel's darkness, its screech pulling Nia from her thoughts. She stepped forward, her sneakers gripping the platform's edge. The cold air stung her face, a sharp reminder of the world outside her calculations. Somewhere in the city, people laughed in warm restaurants, planning futures unburdened by hospital beepers or overdue notices. Nia envied them, but envy was a fleeting indulgence. She had a pharmacy to visit, a sister to comfort, and a mother to hold on to for as long as the universe allowed. As the train doors hissed open, Nia boarded, unaware that a single collision in the next few moments would change the trajectory of her life forever. The L platform at Chicago's Roosevelt Station vibrated with the distant rumble of an approaching train, its echo bouncing off the tiled walls. Nia Carter stood near the platform's edge, her worn sneakers planted firmly on the damp concrete, her thin jacket offering little defense against the November chill. Her deep brown eyes, shadowed by exhaustion, stared into the tunnel's darkness, her mind tangled in a web of calculations. Pharmacy costs, overdue rent, Zoe's college application fees. The faint glow of her phone screen lingered in her memory. Zoe's text about their mother's rough night, a weight in her chest. The platform was nearly empty, save for a few night shift workers and a lone busker strumming a mournful tune on a battered guitar. Nia barely noticed. Her thoughts were a relentless loop of duty and survival. She didn't see the man hurrying down the platform until it was too late. Ethan Caldwell, his tailored charcoal suit cutting a sharp silhouette against the dim station lights, moved with purpose, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete. His gray-blue eyes were fixed on his phone, a flurry of missed calls from Sophia Langley flashing across the screen. His dark hair, usually impeccable, was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his fingers through it one too many times. In his left hand, he gripped a steaming coffee cup. In his right, a pair of black leather gloves, their buttery softness starkly contrasting to the gritty surroundings. He was late, again, for a dinner with Sophia and her parents, a ritual that felt more like a contract negotiation than a celebration of their engagement. The collision unfolded in a heartbeat. Ethan's shoulder caught Nia's as he rushed past, spinning her slightly off balance. The coffee cup flew from his hand, its lid popping off mid-air, sending an arc of scalding liquid across the platform. The gloves hit the ground with a soft thud, landing near Nia's sneakers. "Oh, God, I'm so sorry," Nia gasped, dropping to her knees to gather the scattered items. Her hands trembled as she reached for the gloves, their leather impossibly smooth, likely worth more than her weekly paycheck. The faint scent of antiseptic clung to her, a remnant of her hospital shift, mingling with the spilled coffee's bitter aroma. "No, it was my fault," Ethan said, his voice deep and measured, tinged with an emotion Nia couldn't place. Regret, perhaps, or a weariness that mirrored her own. She looked up, and time seemed to pause. Like a storm rolling over Lake Michigan, his gray-blue eyes locked onto hers. The world shrank to the space between them for a moment. The flickering platform lights, the distant train's screech, the cold air, all faded. Nia's breath caught, her heart thudding against her ribs. Ethan stared as if he'd seen something unexpected that made his carefully constructed world tilt. His gaze traced her face, lingering on the tiny scar above her left eyebrow, a remnant of a childhood fall, then dropping to her parted lips. "Your gloves," Nia whispered, holding them out. Her voice trembled, betraying the electricity that sparked through her. Ethan reached for them, his fingers brushing hers for a fleeting instant. The contact sent a jolt up her arm, a reminder that beneath her exhaustion, she was still alive, still capable of feeling something sharp and new. His hand lingered, the warmth of his skin a contrast to the chilly platform. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer now, but he didn't look away. His eyes held hers, searching, as if trying to memorize every detail. The curve of her cheek, the faint flush creeping up her neck. The train's brakes screeched, shattering the moment. Nia blinked, suddenly aware of the platform, the spilled coffee pooling at her feet, the weight of her bag slung over her shoulder. "I have to go," she said, stepping toward the opening train doors. Her voice was barely audible, swallowed by the mechanical roar. "Wait," Ethan called, but she was already moving, slipping into the crowded car. She didn't dare look back, afraid of what she might see in his eyes, or what he might see in hers. Through the train's grimy window, she caught one last glimpse of him, standing motionless on the platform, the gloves clutched in his hands like a lifeline. His face was unreadable, but his stillness spoke of something stirred, something he couldn't name. As the train lurched forward, plunging into the tunnel's darkness, Nia pressed her forehead against the cool glass. Her hands still trembled, the ghost of his touch lingering on her skin. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, a tired mind playing tricks, a fleeting moment in a city of millions. But her heart, traitorous and stubborn, beat faster, whispering that something had shifted. The gloves, the spilled coffee, those storm-gray eyes felt like the start of something she wasn't ready for, something that could unravel the careful walls she'd built to survive. On the platform, Ethan stood frozen, the train's red taillights fading into the tunnel. The gloves felt heavier than they should, as if they carried the weight of the woman who'd handed them back. Her face, those deep brown eyes, that scar, the quiet strength in her movements, burned in his memory. He'd been running late, distracted by Sophia's demands and his father's expectations, but none mattered now. For the first time in years, Ethan felt awake, as if the collision had cracked open a part of him he'd long buried. The busker's guitar strummed a final haunting note, and Ethan turned toward the stairs, the city's pulse suddenly louder, sharper, alive. Ethan Caldwell stood motionless on the Roosevelt Station platform, the echo of the departing train fading into the tunnel's darkness. The black leather gloves in his hand felt heavier than they should, as if they carried the weight of the woman who'd handed them back. Nia Carter's face, her deep brown eyes, the small scar above her eyebrow, the quiet grace in her movements, burned in his memory like a photograph he couldn't stop studying. The faint scent of antiseptic on her skin, a telltale sign of her hospital work, lingered in his senses, stirring a mix of unease and fascination. His gray-blue eyes scanned the empty platform, the spilled coffee pooling at his feet, a dark mirror reflecting his disheveled reflection. Ethan felt something crack in the armor he'd built around his heart for the first time in years. He was late for dinner with Sophia Langley and her parents, a ritual that tightened the invisible chains of their engagement. The merger between Caldwell Wealth Management and the Langley Group was set to finalize next month, alongside their wedding, a transaction masquerading as love. Sophia's sharp beauty and sharper ambition complemented Ethan's role as the youngest partner in his family's financial empire. But their relationship was a cold contract, devoid of warmth. Ethan's phone buzzed insistently, Sophia's name flashing across the screen. 17 missed calls, each a silent accusation. He ignored it, slipping the gloves into his pocket and climbing the station stairs, the November wind biting his face. Chicago's skyline loomed above, its glass towers glinting like the promises of a life Ethan had mastered but never truly wanted. At 35, he was the heir to a fortune that managed half the city's elite portfolios, a man whose approval could shift markets. But beneath the tailored suits and polished demeanor, Ethan was hollow, his life shaped by a loss that had carved out his soul. 10 years ago, his sister Clara had died at 19. Her wild curls and infectious laugh silenced in a hospital bed at Northwestern Memorial. Pneumonia, misdiagnosed as a minor respiratory infection due to delayed testing and an understaffed ward, had stolen her in days. When she took her final breath, Ethan had been in New York, closing a deal. The guilt of his absence and rage at the hospital's negligence had hardened into a wall he'd vowed never to let anyone breach. Nia's touch on the platform, brief as it was, had shaken that wall. Ethan replayed the collision in his mind as he walked to his waiting car, a sleek black sedan parked under a flickering streetlight. The driver, Charles, looked up from his newspaper, his weathered face creasing with relief. "Mr. Caldwell, sir, shall I take you to the Langley residence?" Ethan hesitated, his hand on the door handle. He caught his reflection through the car's tinted window, sharp jaw, storm gray eyes, the perfect picture of success. But Nia's genuine concern, her instinctive apology for a collision that was his fault, had pierced through that facade. She hadn't seen dollar signs or a name to leverage. She'd seen a man who'd spilled his coffee, nothing more. "No," Ethan said, his voice steady but distant. "Please, take me home." Charles nodded, sensing the shift in his employer's mood. As the car wove through Chicago's traffic, Ethan's thoughts churned. Clara had been bright in their sterile, money-driven family, stubborn, brilliant, determined to save the world through renewable energy. Her death had left a void Ethan filled with work, building walls so high no one could hurt him again. The doctors and nurses at Northwestern, overworked and careless, became the focus of his anger. He'd sued the hospital, winning a $15 million settlement, but no amount of money could erase the image of Clara's pale face in a sterile room, her hand slipping from his in a dream he couldn't escape. Nia was a nurse. He'd known it when he smelled the antiseptic on her. That should have repelled him, should have triggered the familiar rage. Instead, her quiet strength, the way she'd knelt to retrieve his gloves without hesitation, had stirred something dormant. Ethan's fingers traced the gloves in his pocket, their leather soft against his calloused hands. When was the last time he'd felt anything real? The answer came like a blade. 10 years ago, before Clara's death, before he'd become the man his father, William, wanted. A polished extension of the Caldwell legacy, emotionally unavailable, strategically flawless. His phone buzzed again, a text from his father. "Where are you? The Langleys are waiting. Don't jeopardize the merger." Ethan stared at the words until they blurred, the weight of obligation pressing against his chest. William Caldwell had molded him into a weapon of ambition, but tonight, standing on that platform, Ethan had felt human again. Full of exhaustion and kindness, Nia's eyes had seen him, not the heir or the deal-maker. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. As the car pulled up to his Gold Coast penthouse, Ethan stepped out, the city's lights sprawling below like a map of his empire. He dismissed Charles with a nod and rode the elevator to the 40th floor, the gloves still in his hand. Inside, the penthouse was silent. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, artwork that screamed wealth but offered no warmth. Ethan stood by the window, staring at Lake Michigan's dark expanse. Clara's laugh echoed in his memory, teasing him about his carbon footprint. She'd have liked Nia, he thought, the idea both painful and grounding. Clara would have seen the same quiet strength he'd glimpsed, the same uncalculated decency. His phone rang. Sophia, no doubt furious. Ethan let it go to voicemail, his gaze fixed on the gloves. They were a tether to a moment that felt like a lifeline, a reminder that something fundamental had slipped through his defenses. Tomorrow, he'd face Sophia's anger, his father's disapproval, the endless demands of a life he'd built to avoid feeling. But tonight, all he could think of was Nia. Her trembling hands, her steady gaze, the way she disappeared into the train like a dream he wasn't ready to wake from. Ethan didn't know how, but knew he'd find her again. The collision had changed something fundamental, and for the first time in a decade, he wasn't sure he wanted to fight it. Nia Carter stepped into the cramped South Side apartment, the faint hum of the L still echoing in her ears from the ride home. The living room was dim, lit only by a flickering table lamp that cast long shadows across the worn couch and cluttered coffee table. College brochures and a dog-eared SAT prep book lay scattered, Zoe's dreams of studying environmental science spilling over in colorful pamphlets. The air smelled of chamomile tea, Zoe's latest attempt to ease their mother's nausea. Heavy with exhaustion, Nia's deep brown eyes scanned the room, her coiled hair loosening from its bun as she shrugged off her thin jacket. Her sneakers left faint smudges on the scuffed hardwood, a testament to the long shift at Chicago General Hospital. Zoe sat cross-legged on the floor, her bright eyes narrowed at a laptop screen, fingers tapping furiously. Her smooth brown skin caught the lamp's glow, but her jaw was tight, and her shoulders were hunched with tension Nia knew too well. The apartment was quiet, save for the soft rasp of Evelyn's oxygen machine from the bedroom. Nia's heart clenched at the sound, a reminder of her mother's fading strength. She set her bag down, the memory of her collision with Ethan Caldwell, his gray-blue eyes, the jolt of his touch, still tingling in her fingertips. But that fleeting moment felt like a dream, out of place in the stark reality of her life. "Hey, Zoe," Nia said softly, crossing to the kitchenette to fill a kettle. "How's Mom doing?" Zoe didn't look up, her fingers pausing mid-keystroke. "She's sleeping." Finally, her voice was sharp, edged with a resentment that had grown since Evelyn's diagnosis. Nia nodded, swallowing the urge to ask more. She knew Zoe's anger wasn't just about tonight. It was about the cancer, the bills, the way Nia's hospital shifts left Zoe to handle too much alone. Nia busied herself with the kettle, and the clink of porcelain mugs was a small comfort. "You're still working on those applications?" she asked, glancing at the brochures. One from Northwestern promised a top-tier environmental science program, Zoe's dream, since she'd dissected tide pool ecosystems in a library book at 12. "Yeah," Zoe muttered, shoving a pamphlet aside. "Not that it matters. We can't afford half these schools." Her words landed like a slap, and Nia's hands stilled on the counter. "We'll figure it out," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "There's financial aid, scholarships." "Stop it, Nia!" Zoe's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "You're always at the hospital, saving everyone else. But you're never here when we need you. Mom was crying for you tonight, and I had to lie and say you'd be home soon. I'm losing her, and you're just gone." The outburst echoed in the small apartment, each word a shard of glass. Nia's throat tightened, guilt flooding her. She wanted to argue. She worked those shifts to keep them afloat, to pay for Evelyn's meds, to give Zoe a shot at college. But Zoe's pain was raw, undeniable. "Zoe, I'm trying," Nia said, stepping closer. "I'm doing everything I can." Zoe's laugh was bitter, her hands balling into fists. Trying isn't enough. I'm 17, Nia. I shouldn't be holding Mom's hand every night, telling her it will be okay when we both know it's not. Tears glistened in Zoe's eyes, and Nia's heart cracked. She knelt beside her sister, reaching out, but Zoe flinched, pulling away. Zoe said, "I'm going to the college fair next week." Her voice quieter now, brittle. "Will you even be there? Or will you be saving someone else's mom?" Nia's breath caught. "I'll be there," she promised, her voice thick. "I swear, Zoe." Zoe nodded, unconvinced, and turned back to her laptop, shutting Nia out. The kettle whistled, a shrill interruption, and Nia rose to pour the tea, her hands trembling. She carried a mug to Evelyn's bedroom, the door creaking as she entered. Evelyn lay propped against pillows, her frail frame swallowed by blankets. Her skin, once a rich brown, was now ashen, her eyes heavy but sharp with love. The oxygen mask fogged with each shallow breath, and Nia set the tea on the nightstand, adjusting the mask gently. "You're home," Evelyn whispered, her voice thin but warm. "Zoe said you had a long shift." Nia smiled, brushing a strand of gray hair from her mother's forehead. "Yeah, but I'm here now." Evelyn's hand, cool and fragile, closed around Nia's. "You're doing enough, baby. More than enough." Her words were a lifeline, but Nia couldn't shake the doubt. Enough would mean a cure, a paid-off bill, a sister who didn't feel abandoned. She sat on the bed's edge, holding Evelyn's hand, the steady beep of the oxygen machine a counterpoint to her racing thoughts. "Zoe's scared," Evelyn said, her eyes searching Nia's. "She's angry, but it's not about you. It's about losing me." Nia nodded, tears pricking her eyes. "I know, Mama. I don't know how to be everything she needs." Evelyn squeezed her hand, a faint echo of her old strength. "You don't have to be everything. Just be her sister. Show up. That's what she'll remember." Nia swallowed hard, the weight of her mother's words settling deep. She wanted to believe it, but the image of Zoe's tear-streaked face, the sting of her accusations, lingered. As Nia left Evelyn's room, the apartment felt smaller, the walls closing with the weight of her responsibilities. She glanced at Zoe, still hunched over her laptop, the college brochures, which were a silent testament to dreams Nia was determined to protect. The collision with Ethan flickered in her mind, those storm-gray eyes, the warmth of his touch, but she pushed it aside. That moment belonged to a different world, where she could afford to feel something new. In this apartment, her life was about Evelyn's next breath, Zoe's future, the rent check she'd write tomorrow. Nia sank onto the couch, the lamp's flicker casting her shadow across the room, and wondered if she'd ever find space for herself in the life she was fighting to hold together. The cardiac wing of Chicago General Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos, the steady beep of monitors blending with the shuffle of footsteps and the low murmur of voices. Nia Carter stood at the trauma bay entrance, her navy blue scrubs slightly wrinkled from a 12-hour shift, her coiled hair tucked into a tight bun. Her deep brown eyes flicked to the clock. 2:17 p.m. As she adjusted her stethoscope, the faint scent of antiseptic clinging to her hands. The memory of her collision with Ethan Caldwell 3 days ago lingered, his gray-blue eyes and the jolt of their touch, a distraction she couldn't afford. She pushed it aside, focusing on the chart in her hand, until Dr. Patricia Wells appeared, her expression unusually guarded. "Carter, Trauma Bay 3, Dr. Wells said, her voice clipped. "Motor vehicle accident, male, minor head trauma, possible concussion. He's conscious, but..." She paused, her eyes narrowing. "He's asking for you specifically." You described yourself down to that scar above your eyebrow. Nia's heart stuttered, her fingers tightening on the chart. It couldn't be him. The odds were absurd in a city of millions. Did he give a name? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Dr. Wells shook her head. No, but he was insistent. Said he met you a few days ago. The world tilted slightly, and Nia's professional instincts warred with a surge of curiosity. She nodded, following Dr. Wells, her sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. She pushed through the curtain of Trauma Bay 3 and froze. Ethan Caldwell sat on the examination table, his tailored suit jacket torn at the shoulder, a butterfly bandage stark against his left temple. His dark hair was disheveled, a faint smudge of dried blood on his white shirt, but his gray-blue eyes were alert, locked on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. You came, he said softly, his voice carrying a vulnerability that hadn't been there on the platform. Nia swallowed, her training kicking in. I'm working, she said, her tone breathier than intended. What happened? Are you hurt? Fender bender on Lakeshore Drive, Ethan replied, his gaze never leaving her. Nothing serious. He shifted, wincing slightly, and Nia stepped closer, her hands automatically reaching for his chart. She checked his pupils, her fingers brushing the bandage, her professionalism a shield against the warmth spreading in her chest. She said, You don't know me, half question, half statement, as she noted his vitals. Ethan's lips quirked, a faint smile. We met for 30 seconds. He paused, his voice dropping. 37 seconds. I counted. Nia's hands stilled, her eyes meeting his. Up close, she saw the exhaustion lines around his eyes, the careful way he held himself, as if braced for disappointment. His subtle and expensive cologne mingled with the hospital's sterile air, pulling her closer despite herself. Why ask for me? She whispered, forgetting her professional distance. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice rough, because you looked at me like I was just a guy who spilled his coffee. Not someone to impress or avoid. The honesty in his words hit her like a wave, and she stepped back, clutching the chart to steady herself. Your tests look normal, she said, forcing her voice to stay even. You should be fine to go home, but someone needs to monitor you tonight for delayed concussion symptoms. Ethan's expression flickered, a shadow crossing his face. There's no one. The admission hung between them, surprising them both. Nia studied him, his polished exterior at odds with the loneliness in his eyes. She hesitated, then heard herself say, The cafeteria has decent coffee. If you can wait an hour, I'll check on you again. Make sure you're steady. Ethan's smile was slight but genuine, transforming his face into something open, almost boyish. I'd like that, he said, his voice warm. An hour later, they sat across from each other in the hospital cafeteria, a linoleum oasis lit by harsh fluorescent lights. The space was nearly empty, occupied only by a weary resident nursing an energy drink and a janitor mopping the far corner. Nia cradled a cup of bitter coffee, using it as a barrier, while Ethan held his like it was fine wine, grimacing at the taste. This is awful, he said, taking another sip. Hospital coffee always is, Nia replied, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Keeps us alert through sheer offense. Ethan chuckled, the sound easing the tension between them. How's your sister doing? He asked, his tone careful, as if testing the boundaries of their conversation. Nia's fingers tightened on her cup, Zoe's earlier outburst flashing in her mind. She's brilliant but angry, wants to study environmental science and save the planet, but she's stuck dealing with everything else. She hesitated, then added, Mom's not doing great. Cancer's winning. Ethan nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "That's a lot to carry," he said quietly. "You don't seem like someone who stops trying, though." Nia met his gaze, surprised by his perceptiveness. "I don't have a choice," she said, her voice raw. "They need me." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the plastic table. "And who's there for you?" The question caught her off guard, and she looked away, the cafeteria's flickering lights blurring in her vision. She noticed his discomfort, a subtle flinch when a monitor beeped nearby, a tension in his jaw that spoke of more than a car accident. "You don't like hospitals," she said, more observation than question. Ethan's smile was tight. "Bad memories," he said, leaving it at that. The conversation paused, the weight of their unspoken pasts filling the silence. Nia's pager buzzed, pulling her back to reality. "I have to go," she said, standing. Ethan rose too, his torn jacket a reminder of his vulnerability. "Thank you, Nia," he said, her name soft on his lips. She nodded, her heart racing as she walked away, his gaze lingering on her back. The cafeteria's fluorescent glow faded behind her, but the warmth of their connection followed, a fragile spark in the chaos of her world. Nia Carter stood in front of her bedroom mirror, her deep brown eyes scanning two sweaters draped over the bed, a navy cardigan, safe and professional, and a burgundy, softer, more feminine. Her coiled hair was loose for once, framing her face in gentle curls, but her hands trembled as she debated her choice. The memory of Ethan Caldwell's gray-blue eyes in the hospital cafeteria, his quiet question, "Who's there for you?" lingered like a melody she couldn't shake. Tonight was their first real date, a step into a world that felt both thrilling and impossible. She settled on the burgundy sweater, its warmth a small act of courage, and smoothed it over her jeans, her reflection a mix of nerves and determination. Zoe leaned against the doorway, her bright eyes teasing. "You're stressing over a sweater for coffee guy," she said, a smirk on her lips. "You like him?" Nia shot her sister a look, adjusting her earrings. "It's just dinner, Zoe." But Zoe's grin widened, a rare glimpse of the playful girl she'd been before their mother's illness. "He sent those lilies, didn't he?" Mom smiled all morning. The bouquet of white lilies sat on their kitchen table, their delicate scent filling the apartment. Evelyn whispered, "Your daddy loved lilies," her frail voice wistful, and Nia's heart skipped, wondering if Ethan's choice was deliberate or a lucky coincidence. Nia grabbed her purse, her sneakers swapped for low boots that clicked softly on the hardwood. "Be good, okay? Check on Mom." Zoe nodded, her smirk softening. "Have fun, Nia. You deserve it." The words caught Nia off guard, a reminder of Zoe's love beneath her recent anger. She hugged her sister tightly, then stepped into the November evening, the Chicago air sharp against her skin. Mario's, the family-owned Italian restaurant Ethan had chosen in Lincoln Park, was a far cry from the downtown steakhouses she'd expected. Its warm brick exterior and glowing windows felt welcoming, unpretentious. A world away from the glittering towers of Ethan's life. Nia arrived first, her nerves jangling as the hostess led her to a corner table by windows overlooking the park. The restaurant smelled of garlic and fresh bread, and its checkered tablecloths and candlelight created a cozy intimacy. She fidgeted with the menu, her fingers tracing the worn edges, until Ethan walked in. He wore dark jeans and a gray sweater that made his eyes shimmer like winter water, his dark hair slightly tousled. Without his tailored suit, he looked younger, more approachable. His polished exterior softened. "You found it okay?" he asked, sliding into the seat across from her, his smile warm. "GPS is a wonderful thing," Nia said, accepting the menu from their waitress and being grateful for the distraction. Ethan's gaze was steady, tracing her face, the scar above her eyebrow, the curve of her lips, with an intensity that made her pulse race. "This place is lovely," she said, glancing around. "How'd you know about it?" Ethan's smile turned wistful, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "I used to come here with my sister, Clara. She loved their tiramisu and said it could make her forget calculus exams." His voice softened, carrying a weight Nia recognized. Grief, carefully guarded. "Does it hurt, being here?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Ethan's fingers paused, his expression open. "I thought it would, but it doesn't. It feels right, like she'd approve." Nia nodded, her grief for her mother echoing in the space between them. They ordered chicken parmesan for her, seafood risotto for him, and the conversation flowed like the candlelight flickering on their table. Ethan asked about Zoe's college applications, listening intently as Nia described her sister's passion for environmental science and her dreams of tackling climate change. "She's brilliant," Nia said, her voice warm. "But the financial aid forms keep me up at night." Ethan's eyes softened, but he didn't offer to help, a restraint Nia appreciated. "She sounds like someone who'll change the world," he said. Nia smiled, then turned the question back. "What was Clara like?" Ethan's face lit up, a rare, unguarded moment. Stubborn, brilliant. She also wanted to save the planet. Renewable energy was her thing. Used to lecture me about my carbon footprint every time I took the company jet. He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth, a shadow crossing his face. "She'd have liked you." Nia's heart skipped, but then she noticed a faint tan line on his ring finger, barely visible in the candlelight. Her stomach tightened. "You're engaged," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Ethan's face went pale, his fork clattering to the plate. "Was," he said quickly, his voice rough. "I ended it yesterday with Sophia. It was a business arrangement, not love. Our families wanted the merger, but I couldn't go through with it." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Not after meeting you. Those 37 seconds on the platform showed me what I was missing." Nia's breath caught, her fingers gripping the napkin. The sincerity in his voice was undeniable, but doubt gnawed at her. His world, company jets, mergers, was a universe apart from hers, where rent and hospital bills dictated every choice. "Ethan, we're so different," she said softly, gesturing to the cozy restaurant, the simple meal. "This isn't your life." He shook his head, his hand reaching across the table, stopping short of hers. "This is more my life than any boardroom. You make me feel real." The words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Nia wanted to believe him, but fear held her back. Fear of heartbreak, of a world she couldn't navigate. She glanced out the window, where couples strolled under streetlights, their lives seemingly simple. "This is complicated," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's smile was soft and determined. Most worthwhile things are. Their eyes met momentarily. The gap between their worlds felt smaller, the candlelight a bridge they might dare to cross. The November air carried a sharp chill as Ethan Caldwell pulled up to Chicago General Hospital, the sleek black sedan idling under the glow of a street lamp. His gray-blue eyes scanned the entrance, where nurses in scrubs moved like shadows against the glass doors. In his hand, a cardboard tray held 2 coffees, their steam curling in the cold. It had been 2 weeks since his date with Nia Carter at Mario's, and their connection had grown with quiet persistence. Coffee breaks during her shifts, late-night texts, a ride for Zoe to her college fair when Nia was stuck at work. Each moment felt like a step towards something real, something Ethan hadn't dared hope for since Clara's death. Yet, A nagging unease had taken root, a shadow he couldn't shake. Nia's smile, warm and genuine at Mario's, had faltered recently. Ethan noticed it in small moments. A flinch when he mentioned a hospital merger his firm was brokering. A quick change of subject when he asked about her nursing training. A distant look in her deep brown eyes when he spoke of Clara. Last night, over takeout at her apartment, she'd tensed when he'd said, "Clara's nurses were so careless. It still makes me angry." Her fork had paused midair, her lips parting as if to speak, but she'd only nodded, her gaze dropping to her plate. The memory gnawed at Ethan, stirring a fear he couldn't name. Was she hiding something? A past relationship? A personal struggle? Or something darker? He stepped out of the car, his dark hair ruffling in the wind, and crossed to the hospital entrance, where the coffees were a peace offering. Inside, the lobby hummed with activity, the antiseptic scent sharp in his nose, triggering a familiar tightness in his chest. Hospitals always did. Memories of Clara's pale face, the sterile room where she'd slipped away, haunted him still. He spotted Nia at the nurse's station, her coiled hair tucked into a bun, her navy scrubs slightly wrinkled. She was updating a chart, her movements precise but weary. "He brought you something," Ethan said, holding up the coffee tray, his voice light despite the unease in his gut. Nia's eyes lit up, a smile breaking through her fatigue. "You're spoiling me," she said, taking the cup, her fingers brushing his. The warmth of her touch sent a jolt through him, but her smile faded quickly, her gaze flickering to the hospital monitors behind him. "Busy day?" he asked, leaning against the counter, trying to read her. "Always," she said, her voice clipped as she sipped the coffee. A beeper sounded, and she glanced at it, her jaw tightening. "I've got to check on a patient. Thanks for this, Ethan." She turned away, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, leaving him with a distance he couldn't bridge. Ethan's fingers drummed on the steering wheel in his car, and the black leather gloves from their first meeting rested on the passenger seat. Nia's fleeting reactions replayed in his mind. Her discomfort at the word nurses, her guarded silences. He'd opened his heart to her, ended his engagement to Sophia for a chance at something real. But now doubt crept in. Was she pulling away because of their different worlds? Or was there something she wasn't telling him? The thought of being deceived, of letting someone past his defenses, only to be hurt again, tightened his throat. Clara's death had taught him to trust no one, especially not those tied to hospitals. He pulled out his phone, hesitating before dialing a number he hadn't used in years. "Mr. Caldwell," came the gruff voice of Tom Harlan, a private investigator his firm had employed for corporate due diligence. "What can I do for you?" Ethan's jaw clenched, guilt warring with resolve. "I need a background check," he said, his voice low, discreet. "A nurse at Chicago General, Nia Carter. Focus on her time as a resident at Northwestern Memorial and any incidents or records." Harlan didn't ask questions, only confirmed the details and promised a report within days. Ethan ended the call, his hand trembling as he set the phone down. He told himself he was protecting their relationship, ensuring no secrets could destroy them. But deep down, he feared he was betraying the trust Nia had placed in him. The next day, Ethan drove Zoe to her school's college fair, where the sedan's leather seats contrasted with the South Side's cracked sidewalks. Zoe sat in the passenger seat, her bright eyes scanning a Northwestern brochure, her fingers tapping nervously. "Thanks for the ride," she said, her voice softer than usual. "Nia's always working." Ethan nodded, his thoughts still on Nia's distant gaze. "She's doing it for you," he said, glancing at her. Zoe's lips quirked, a mix of pride and sadness. "Yeah, but sometimes I wish she'd do something for herself. Like, let you stick around." She smirked, but her eyes held a challenge, as if testing his intentions. Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. "I'm trying," he said, his voice rough. Zoe studied him, then nodded. "Good. She deserves someone who sees her, not just Nurse Nia." Her words hit hard, echoing the honesty he'd felt in Nia's presence that first night on the platform. Ethan's resolve wavered as he dropped Zoe off, her backpack slung over her shoulder. He wanted to trust Nia and believe in the connection that had made him feel alive again. But the doubts persisted, fueled by her subtle flinches, her guarded silences. That evening, in his Gold Coast penthouse, Ethan stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lake Michigan's dark expanse stretching below. The gloves lay on the coffee table, a reminder of Nia's kindness, her trembling hands returning them on the platform. His phone buzzed. Sophia, demanding a meeting to discuss the fallout of their broken engagement. He ignored it, his mind on Nia. The investigator's report would come soon, and with it, answers. But as he stared at the city lights, Ethan felt a pang of dread. What if the truth was something he couldn't handle? What if Nia's secret was tied to the very pain he'd spent a decade burying? The thought was a knife twisting in his chest, and for the first time, Ethan wondered if opening his heart had been a mistake. The cardiac wing of Chicago General Hospital thrummed with the familiar rhythm of beeping monitors and hurried footsteps. Nia Carter stood in the supply closet, restocking gauze pads with mechanical precision, her deep brown eyes shadowed by exhaustion. Her coiled hair was tucked into a tight bun, her navy scrubs faintly wrinkled from hours on her feet. The faint scent of antiseptic clung to her hands, a constant reminder of her life's work. But her mind was elsewhere, replaying Ethan Caldwell's coffee deliveries, his quiet smile at Mario's, the warmth of his hand brushing hers. Their fragile but growing connection felt like a lifeline in the chaos of her days. Yet, a nagging unease stirred. His flinch at hospital equipment, his sharp comment about careless nurses, hinted at a pain she didn't fully understand. Aisha Rodriguez, her closest friend and fellow nurse, appeared in the doorway, her dark eyes serious behind her glasses. "Nia, we need to talk," she said, her voice low, urgent. She clutched her phone, the screen glowing with a news article. Nia's stomach nodded at Aisha's tone, one reserved for bad news, patient setbacks, budget cuts, or worse. "Break room now," Aisha added, leading the way down the corridor. The break room was a small, fluorescent-lit space, its chipped table littered with coffee cups and dog-eared magazines. Aisha shut the door, her expression a mix of worry and resolve. "What's going on?" Nia asked, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum as she sank into a plastic chair. Aisha slid the phone across the table, the headline stark. "Maddox family settles 15 on malpractice suit after daughter's death at Northwestern Memorial." Nia's breath caught as she scanned the article. Clara Caldwell, Ethan's sister, had died at 19 in February 2015. Her pneumonia misdiagnosed as a minor infection due to delayed testing and an understaffed ward. The family had sued the hospital, targeting 3 doctors and 2 nurses for negligence. Nia's hands trembled, the phone nearly slipping from her grip. "Northwestern Memorial," she whispered. "That's where I did my residency." Aisha nodded, her voice gentle but firm. "You were there, Nia. Cardiac wing, 2014 to 2016. Clara died in February 2015. The words hit like a physical blow, and Nia's mind raced back to that chaotic winter. She'd been a resident, working grueling shifts under the best cardiologists in Chicago. The night of February 18th came back in fragments. A hectic ward, multiple emergencies, a young woman with dark curls looking too pale in a hallway bed. Nia hadn't been assigned to her, had trusted the attending physicians to handle her case. But she'd passed her in the corridor, her gut whispering something was wrong. The memory was a shard of glass, cutting deeper with each detail. "I wasn't her nurse," Nia said, her voice shaking. "I covered other patients and followed protocol." Aisha reached across the table, her hand steadying Nia's. "I know. You didn't do anything wrong. But Ethan, he blames nurses, doctors, the whole system. If he finds out you were there." She trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging heavy. Nia's heart pounded, the warmth of Ethan's smile at Mario's now tainted by dread. He'd opened up about Clara, his voice raw with grief, and she'd listened, falling for him, unaware of her connection to his pain. "What do I do?" Nia asked, her eyes searching Aisha's. Her friend sighed, pushing her glasses up. "You have to tell him. Not now, but soon. He deserves the truth, and you can't build something real on a lie." Nia nodded, but fear coiled in her chest. Telling Ethan could shatter everything. Their late-night talks, his rides for Zoe, the lilies he'd sent that made Evelyn smile. She imagined his gray-blue eyes turning cold, his trust crumbling as he realized she'd been at Northwestern that night, part of the system he despised. Back at the nurse's station, Nia moved through her tasks on autopilot, her hands trembling as she updated charts. Ethan texted, his message lighting up her phone. "Coffee tomorrow? Found a place with better brew than the cafeteria." She stared at the words, her throat tight. She wanted to reply with her usual warmth, to keep their fragile connection intact. But guilt gnawed at her. Instead, she typed, "Busy shift. I'll let you know," and hit send, her fingers cold. The lie felt like a betrayal, but the truth felt like a grenade she wasn't ready to pull the pin on. That evening, in her South Side apartment, Nia sat on the couch, the lamplight casting shadows across Zoe's college brochures. Evelyn slept fitfully in the next room, the oxygen machine's hum a constant undercurrent. Zoe, sprawled on the floor with her laptop, glanced up. "You okay? You look off." Nia forced a smile, tucking a loose curl behind her ear. "Just tired," she said, the words tasting like ash. Zoe's eyes narrowed, but she didn't push, returning to her applications. Nia's gaze drifted to the lilies on the kitchen table, their petals wilting slightly, a reminder of Ethan's thoughtfulness and the secret threatening to unravel it. She closed her eyes, the hospital's chaos replaying. Clara's pale face, the overwhelmed staff, her exhaustion as a resident. Had she missed something that night? Could she have spoken up and changed the outcome? The questions were a weight pressing against her chest. She'd spent her career saving lives, but this one failure, even peripheral, felt like a stain she couldn't wash away. Ethan's trust and vulnerability were a gift she'd cherished, but now it felt like a ticking clock. Nia curled up on the couch, the brochures a silent promise to Zoe, and wondered how long she could carry this secret before it destroyed the first real love she'd ever known. The fluorescent lights of Chicago General Hospital buzzed overhead, casting stark shadows across the cardiac wing. Nia Carter stood at the nurse's station, her deep brown eyes scanning a patient's chart, her coiled hair tucked into a tight bun. Her navy scrubs hung loosely on her frame, exhaustion etched into every movement. The past week had been a haze of guilt, her secret about Clara Caldwell's death, a weight that grew heavier with each text from Ethan, his invitations for coffee, his quiet inquiries about her day. She'd kept her replies short, her smiles forced, terrified that the truth would destroy the fragile love they'd built. Aisha Rodriguez approached, her dark eyes sharp with concern. "Nia, HR got a call yesterday," she said, her voice low. A private investigator asks about your Northwestern Memorial residency, performance, and incidents. I told them to talk to legal. But her words trailed off, but the implication was clear. Nia's heart sank, her fingers tightening on the chart. Ethan. It had to be him. The thought of him digging into her past, violating her trust, sparked a fury that burned through her fear. "Thanks, Aisha," she said, her voice tight. "I need to handle this." Aisha nodded, her expression wary, and Nia grabbed her phone, her hands trembling as she typed, "We need to talk. Your place. Tonight." The elevator ride to Ethan's Gold Coast penthouse felt endless, and the city's glittering skyline was a taunting backdrop through the glass walls. Nia's boots clicked on the marble floor as she stepped into the 40th floor apartment, its floor-to-ceiling windows framing Lake Michigan's dark expanse. The space was sleek, minimalist furniture, abstract art that screamed wealth. But Ethan stood in the center, looking out of place. His dark hair was disheveled, his gray-blue eyes hollow, as if he hadn't slept. His gray sweater clung to his frame, contrasting with the polished suits she'd first seen him in. The black leather gloves from their platform collision sat on a glass table, a silent reminder of their beginning. "You hired a private investigator," Nia said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. It wasn't a question. Ethan's face paled, his hands clenching at his sides. "Nia, it's not what you think," he started, but she cut him off, stepping forward, her purse set down with deliberate care. "You dug into my past, my residency at Northwestern, without asking me. What were you looking for, Ethan? Some scandal to explain why I've been distant?" Her voice shook, anger and hurt intertwining. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his expression fracturing. "I was worried," he said, his voice breaking. "You've been pulling away, flinching when I mention hospitals, dodging questions about your training. I thought someone was hurting you, or there was something you couldn't tell me. So you betrayed my trust to protect me?" Nia's laugh was bitter, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. Ethan stepped toward her, his hands outstretched, but stopped when she shook her head. "What did you find?" she asked, her voice quieter now, dreading the answer. Ethan's shoulders slumped, his gaze dropping to the gloves. "Nothing. Clean record. Exemplary reviews. This only convinced me that something was wrong, because people don't change like you do without a reason." The honesty in his voice stung because he was right. She had changed, carrying a secret that was eating her alive. Nia closed her eyes, the weight of the moment crushing her. She'd wanted to tell him, had rehearsed the words 100 times, but now they spilled out, raw and unstoppable. "I was there, Ethan," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The night Clara died. I was a resident at Northwestern Memorial, working the cardiac wing. February 18th, 2015. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan froze, his gray-blue eyes cycling through shock, disbelief, and something that looked like betrayal. "You were there," he said, his voice hollow, as if the words were a wound. "You knew." "I wasn't her nurse," Nia said quickly, her hands trembling. "I wasn't assigned to her case. I was covering for other patients and following orders. But I was there, on the same floor, during that chaotic shift." She swallowed, her throat tight. "I didn't know until Aisha showed me the article last week. I've been trying to find a way to tell you, but I was scared. Scared you'd look at me like you're looking at me now." Ethan's jaw clenched, his hands balling into fists. "You've known for a week," he said, his voice rising. "A week of letting me talk about Clara, letting me trust you, knowing you were part of the system that failed her." "I didn't fail her," Nia said, her voice breaking. "I was a resident, Ethan, doing what I was told. The hospital was understaffed. The doctors missed the diagnosis. I passed her in the hallway, saw she looked pale, but I trusted the team. I've spent every day since saving lives, trying to make up for nights like that. Ethan's laugh was sharp, cutting. And you let me fall in love with you, knowing you were there, knowing I blamed nurses like you for her death. Each word was a blow, and Nia's tears spilled over, hot against her cheeks. She said I also fell in love with you, her voice raw. And it terrified me, because I knew this moment would come. I never meant to hurt you. Ethan turned to the window, his silhouette stark against the city lights. You didn't just hurt me, he said, his voice low, final. You made me believe in something real. Now I see it was built on a lie. I can't look at you without seeing that hospital, without wondering if you walked past her room that night. The words sliced through Nia, her heart breaking with a clean snap. She wanted to reach for him, to bridge the chasm between them, but his rigid stance stopped her. I should go, she whispered, picking up her purse with shaking hands. Ethan didn't move or work. His silence was louder than any argument. At the elevator, Nia turned back, her voice trembling. For what it's worth, I would have done anything to save her if I'd known. That's who I am. The doors closed on his stillness, carrying her away from the man she loved and the trust they'd lost. The city blurred through her tears, the weight of her secret now a wound neither could heal. The South Side apartment was cloaked in silence, broken only by the rhythmic hum of Evelyn's oxygen machine. Nia Carter sat on the edge of her mother's bed, her deep brown eyes fixed on Evelyn's frail hand, its cool weight heavy in hers. Her coiled hair hung loose, brushing her shoulders, her navy scrubs discarded for a worn sweatshirt. The lilies Ethan had sent wilted on the kitchen table, their petals curling like the edges of Nia's heart. 3 days ago, she'd walked away from his penthouse, her confession about Clara's death shattering their trust. The memory of Ethan's gray-blue eyes, cold with betrayal, haunted her, a wound that bled alongside her mother's fading strength. Evelyn's breathing slowed, and each exhaled a fragile thread. Nia's chest tightened, guilt and grief intertwining. She'd lied to Ethan by omission, and now she was losing her mother, the one person who'd always seen Went, really seen her, and reminded her she wasn't alone. The words cut deeper now, a reminder of the love she'd lost, and the family she couldn't save. Zoe slipped into the room, her bright eyes red-rimmed, her hands clutching a college brochure. She knelt beside Nia, her voice soft. You're not okay, are you? Nia shook her head, tears prickling. I'm trying, Zoe. Zoe's fingers tightened on the brochure, her voice cracking. I know about Ethan. Aisha told me. You didn't do anything wrong that night at Northwestern. You can't keep punishing yourself. Nia's throat closed, Zoe's words echoing Evelyn's wisdom. I should have told him, she whispered. Zoe leaned closer, her shoulder against Nia's. You were scared. But don't shut him out. Or me. I'm afraid of it too, Nia. I can't lose Mom and you. Nia's heart broke, and she pulled Zoe into a fierce hug. You won't lose me, she said, her voice thick. I'm here, Zoe. Always. Zoe nodded, tears spilling, and they sat together, holding Evelyn's hands, a fragile trio against the inevitable. That night, Evelyn passed peacefully in her sleep, Nia and Zoe at her side, their fingers intertwined with hers. The silence was deafening, the oxygen machine still, the lilies a fading testament to love and loss. At Chicago General, Nia moved through her shifts like a ghost, her sneakers squeaking on the linoleum, her hands steady, but her heart numb. Aisha found her in the break room, the fluorescent lights harsh against Aisha's glasses. Nia, I'm so sorry about your mom, Aisha said, her dark eyes soft. She sat across the chipped table, her hand reaching for Nia's. I lost my brother to addiction 5 years ago. The guilt, it's heavy. But you weren't responsible for Clara. You were a resident, following orders. Let it go for your sake. For your... Nia's eyes burned, and Aisha's words were a mirror to her pain. I don't know how, she admitted. Aisha squeezed her hand. Start by forgiving yourself. You're the best nurse I know, and loved Ethan enough to be scared. That's not a failure. Across town, Ethan buried himself in work, his Gold Coast penthouse, a sterile cage. The black leather gloves sat on his desk, a reminder of Nia's kindness and his cruelty. His gray-blue eyes were hollow, his dark hair unkempt as he pored over spreadsheets, 18-hour days a shield against the silence. Sophia's calls went unanswered, her strategic tears no match for the ache in his chest. His father's texts, "You're throwing away the merger," were ignored. The Caldwell legacy a hollow prize compared to what he'd lost with Nia. Dreams of Clara haunted him nightly. She appeared as she'd been in life, wild curls, mischievous smile, sitting on his childhood bed, swinging her legs. You're being an idiot, Ethan, she said in one vivid dream, her voice exasperated. Nia wasn't even assigned to me. She was a resident, drowning in chaos like everyone else that night. You're punishing her for a system that failed, not her. Ethan argued, his voice hollow even in sleep. She knew and didn't tell me. Clara rolled her eyes. She fell in love with you, knowing you'd hate her for it. That's braver than you've been in years. You've carried this anger too long. It's eating you alive. He woke gasping, Clara's words a blade in his ribs. The dreams felt too real, her voice too clear, forcing him to confront the guilt he'd buried. Guilt for not being there when Clara needed him, for focusing on deals while she faded. Nia had seen him, not the heir, not the deal maker, but the man beneath, and he'd thrown that away, blinded by old rage. He stared at the gloves, their leather worn from his restless hands, and felt a pang of longing for Nia's steady gaze, her gentle touch. The next day, Nia stood in the hospital's records room, her hands shaking as she pulled her old personnel file from Northwestern. The duty roster confirmed it. She'd been on shift that night, covering other patients, not Clara's case. The ward had been a storm of emergencies, understaffed and overwhelmed, but the truth was stark. She hadn't failed Clara, but she'd been there, a silent witness to tragedy. Aisha's words echoed, "Forgive yourself." But the weight of Ethan's betrayal, his investigator's intrusion, and Evelyn's death pressed harder. Zoe's plea lingered too. Don't shut me out. Nia closed the file, and her resolve wavered. She couldn't change the past, but could choose what came next, even if it meant facing Ethan's pain again. The Chicago skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Caldwell Wealth Management boardroom, a stark contrast to the tension crackling within. Ethan Caldwell stood at the head of the polished mahogany table, his gray-blue eyes fixed on the city's lights, his dark hair slightly tousled from restless nights. His tailored suit felt like armor, but the black leather gloves from his collision with Nia Carter, tucked into his pocket, were a reminder of the vulnerability he'd embraced and lost. The confrontation with Nia 4 days ago, her revelation about being at Northwestern Memorial when Clara died, had left him raw, his trust shattered. Yet, Clara's dreamlike words, "You're punishing her for a system, not her," echoed, urging him to confront his guilt and anger. His father, William Caldwell, sat at the table's far end, his silver hair glinting under the chandelier, his face a mask of controlled fury. Sophia Langley, Ethan's former fiancée, stood by the window, her sharp features softened by strategic tears, her blonde hair catching the light, The broken engagement and stalled merger between Caldwell Wealth Management and the Langley Group had ignited William's wrath, and this meeting was his attempt to rein Ethan in. William said, "You're throwing away decades of work," his voice low, cutting. "The Langley merger was your responsibility, Ethan. Do you understand the financial implications of your recklessness?" Ethan's jaw clenched, his fingers brushing the gloves in his pocket. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "But I'm done living for your legacy, Father. Sophia and I were never in love. It was a contract, not a marriage." Sophia's eyes flashed, her tears drying as she stepped forward. "You think you can walk away?" she said, her voice sharp. "Our family's planned this for years. You're letting some nurse derail everything?" The word nurse hit like a dart, conjuring Nia's deep brown eyes, her coiled hair, the pain in her voice as she'd confessed her presence at Clara's death. "Nia didn't derail anything," Ethan said, his tone firm. "She showed me what I was missing. A real life, not a transaction." William slammed a hand on the table, the sound echoing. "Real? You're the heir to this firm, Ethan. Your duty is to this family, not some fleeting infatuation." Ethan's chest tightened, memories of Clara's laugh, her disdain for their family's obsession with wealth, grounding him. "Clara would have hated this," he said, his voice low. "She wanted me to live, not to be your puppet. I'm done with deals that cost me my soul." Sophia's lips parted, her composure cracking. "You're choosing her over everything we built?" Ethan met her gaze, seeing the ambition beneath her hurt. "We built nothing, Sophia. You wanted the Caldwell name. I wanted an escape. Nia, she saw me, not the heir." Sophia's eyes narrowed, but she stepped back, her voice cold. "Fine, walk away. But your father won't forgive this, and neither will the board." She gathered her purse and left, her heels clicking on the marble floor, the door closing softly. William rose, his face a storm of disappointment. "You're making a mistake, Ethan. The firm won't survive this kind of instability." Ethan held his ground, the gloves a talisman in his pocket. "The firm will survive," he said, "but I won't know if I keep living for you. I loved Clara, and I failed her by not being there. I won't fail myself, or Nia, by staying in a life that's killing me." William's eyes widened, then hardened. "You're no son of mine if you choose this path." The word stung, but Ethan felt a strange freedom, as if a chain had snapped. "Then I'll be my own man," he said, turning to the window. The city's lights, a map of possibilities. Alone in the boardroom, Ethan's thoughts drifted to Nia, her trembling hands, as she'd left his penthouse, her voice breaking as she'd said, "I would have done anything to save her." He'd been cruel, blinded by old rage, but Clara's dream voice lingered. "She's braver than you." The gloves felt warm in his pocket, reminding him of their first collision, a moment untainted by betrayal. He'd pushed Nia away, but the ache of her absence was unbearable, a void more profound than any deal or merger. That evening, Ethan drove to the south side, the sedan's engine humming as he parked outside Nia's apartment. The cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights felt worlds apart from his Gold Coast life, but they were Nia's world, and he wanted to understand it. He didn't go inside. Zoe's college fair was tomorrow, and Nia would be there, her promise to her sister unbroken. Instead, he sat in the car, the gloves on the dashboard, and let himself feel the weight of his choices. He'd ended the engagement and defied his father, but losing Nia was a cost he hadn't anticipated. Her honesty and strength had cracked his defenses, and he'd repaid her with judgment. His phone buzzed. A text from his assistant about a board meeting, another from Sophia, offering a final chance to reconsider. Ethan ignored them, his eyes on the apartment's lit window, imagining Nia and Zoe inside, grieving Evelyn. He'd learned of her death through a hospital contact, a loss that mirrored his own. Clara's death had taught him to build walls. Nia's love had shown him they could fall. But he'd need courage to face her again, admit his cruelty, and ask for a chance he wasn't sure he deserved. The gloves gleamed under the streetlight, symbolizing the moment that had changed him. Tomorrow, at Evelyn's funeral, he'd try to find the words to bridge the gap he'd widened with his anger. Graceland Cemetery stretched under a pewter October sky, its ancient oaks standing sentinel over weathered headstones. Nia Carter stood beside a freshly dug grave, her deep brown eyes glistening with unshed tears, her coiled hair loose and swaying in the breeze. Her simple black dress clung to her frame, its fabric a quiet contrast to the vibrant woman she'd been before Evelyn's death. Zoe stood at her side, her bright eyes red-rimmed, clutching Nia's arm as if anchoring herself against the grief. Aisha Rodriguez, her dark eyes soft behind glasses, stood nearby, a steady presence among the small gathering of mourners. The lilies Ethan had sent, now wilted, lay atop the casket, their faded petals a testament to loss and love. Nia's hands trembled as she stepped forward to speak, her voice carrying across the cemetery like a prayer. "My mother taught me that healing isn't just about medicine," she said, her words steady despite the tears tracing her cheeks. She said the most powerful thing you can do is see someone, see them, and remind them they're not alone. Her gaze drifted, catching a figure beneath an oak tree. Ethan Caldwell stood apart, his gray-blue eyes fixed on her, his dark hair ruffled by the wind. His presence startled her, a jolt of pain and hope she hadn't expected. His gray coat blended with the autumn shadows, but the black leather gloves in his hand, those from their first collision, gleamed faintly. Nia continued, her voice softening. "Mama also taught me about forgiveness. She said holding on to hurt is like drinking poison and hoping someone else suffers. You let go of yourself to find peace." The words were from a letter she'd seen in Evelyn's things, tucked among old photos. "My darling girl, if someone makes you feel alive, don't run. Fight for them. Love is worth every risk." Nia's eyes met Ethan's across the graves, and she saw not anger, but a sadness mirrored her own. The memory of their confrontation, his cold accusation, her broken confession, stung, but Evelyn's words urged her to consider a different path. The service ended, mourners dispersing under the gray sky. Zoe clung to Nia, her voice a whisper. "Is that him?" she asked, nodding toward Ethan. Aisha's gaze followed, her expression wary but softening. "It's okay," Nia told them, her voice firm. "Give me a minute." Aisha guided Zoe toward the parking lot, shooting Ethan a warning look, leaving Nia alone among the headstones. She approached him, the grass damp beneath her boots, her heart pounding. Ethan stood beneath the oak, his hands clutching the gloves, his face a map of regret and hope. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice breaking the silence. "For your mother, for not being there when you needed me, for everything." His gray-blue eyes searched hers, raw with sincerity. Nia nodded, wrapping her arms against the chill. "She liked you," she said, her voice soft. "You reminded her of my dad, stubborn and proud, but with a good heart." Ethan's lips quirked, a faint smile. Was she right about the heart? Nia's smile was sad but honest. "I thought so, once." The silence stretched, heavy with their shared pain. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulling out the gloves. "I've been dreaming about Clara," he said, his voice low. "She called me an idiot for punishing you. said you weren't responsible for what happened to her, that it was the system, not you. I was angry, Nia, at myself for failing her and took it out on you. His hands trembled, offering the gloves. I was wrong about everything. Nia stared at the gloves, their leather worn from his touch, and felt her resolve shift. Evelyn's letter echoed, "Fight for them," and she realized she'd been running from love, afraid of more loss. She took the gloves, their warmth grounding her. She said, "I found a letter from Mama," pulling an envelope from her purse. Her voice steadied as she read, "My darling girl, if someone makes you feel alive, don't run. Love is worth every risk." Tears burned her eyes, but she met Ethan's gaze. "I can't go back to where we were. Too much is broken. But maybe—" She paused, her heart racing. "Perhaps we can start over, as the people we are now, not the ones our pain made us." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes bright with gold flecks, hope flickering in their depths. "Hi," he said, extending his hand. "I'm Ethan Caldwell, a man who's made mistakes, who's learning to let go of grief, who needs someone to remind him he's human." Nia's breath caught, and Evelyn's words gave her courage. She placed her hand in his, their fingers intertwining. "I'm Nia Carter," she said, her voice strong. "I'm a nurse who believes in second chances and knows broken people can heal each other." The oak's branches swayed above, the gloves forgotten on the ground. No longer a divide, but a symbol of their journey. Zoe and Aisha watched from a distance, Zoe's smirk softening into cautious optimism. "He better not mess this up," she muttered. Aisha squeezed her shoulder. "He won't. Neither will she." As Nia and Ethan walked toward the parking lot, hands joined. The cemetery's silence felt less heavy, the sky a shade brighter. Their epilogue unfolded slowly. Attending Zoe's college fair, visiting Clara's favorite park, rebuilding trust with quiet persistence. Love, forged through pain and forgiveness, grew stronger, a testament that sometimes the universe gives you what you need, even when you're not brave enough to ask.